Hello there, friends. I'm plumb tuckered out. It's Saturday night, and Molly and I spent all afternoon working in the flower gardens, in the yard, in the garden, hauling a whole bunch of mulch all over the place, and we wore ourselves out. So I'm getting in here grubby. So if you missed being with us on Sunday, you're getting garden errand. That's just the way it is. So it's if you can't be with us, at least we have this. You might hear Molly in the background because we've been outside all day, and so you know what the house looks like after a day like that. You know what it's like to enjoy someone's company so much that even when the main event is over, you're still trying to figure out a new way to still hang out. Like the movie's over, but now the kids are trying to plan a sleepover. That's an example. Or the gathering is over, so you talk until the building is locked up, and then you're making plans. Hey, let's go eat together. You go out for drinks and dessert with friends, and you laugh so hard and you share so deeply. Finally, the waiter or waitress comes and they say, "Hey, we're closing the place down for the night." And so you walk across the street to the place that's open later or open 24/7 because you want to keep the conversation going. Or friends have you over for dinner and you get so caught up in conversation that when you finally look at the clock, you realize, oh my goodness, it's almost midnight. Where'd the evening go? These are the kinds of times that make for the best memories because they depict some of the best relationships. And of course, I know COVID has thrown a real monkey wrench in this part of life, but we all know what this feels like still, and it's when you just can't get enough of one another. And so it's hard to end the time together because there's still one more story to tell. There's one more topic to discuss, one more game to play, one more meal to share, one more experience to share. And they're the kind of relationships where you can freely laugh until you cry or cry until you laugh. Can you connect with this feeling that I am describing? Who are you thinking of? I don't know who you're thinking of, but without even knowing who they are, I can bet that you would say about whoever you're thinking of, you would say they are a really special person or they are really special people. Well, it brings us to our gospel story today. Our gospel story today comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. See, this was the way that the tax collectors and the sinners felt about Jesus. The way that I just described, the feeling that I just described, that's how the tax collectors and sinners felt about Jesus. They just couldn't get enough of him. So they were all gathering around Jesus. They were drawing near because they wanted to hear Jesus. They wanted to be with him. And not only was Jesus accepting their invitations, Jesus was hosting these people himself. Parties, get togethers, potlucks, after parties. And they couldn't wait to hear what Jesus was going to say next. To see what topic is he going to bring up next. They couldn't wait to ask the next question. And of course, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law just couldn't stand it. They were all muttering to themselves and complaining, this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. Now, you could ask the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you could say, wait a minute, isn't everyone a sinner? But that really wouldn't fit the way that they were using that word, sinners. You see, sinners meant for them people who weren't living up to their interpretation of the law. That's who they were talking about. They were the undesirables, the poor people who were too busy attempting just to survive to be able to check all the boxes on the long list of purity regulations. Like basically read Leviticus, for example, and then think about someone who they're just trying to survive and so they missed some of the boxes. They were the people on the margins. They were lumped in, of course, with every Gentile, every foreigner, every tax collector, every sick person, an unclean person, every prostitute, no matter if it was a woman who had been kicked to the curb by a husband who just could care less about that woman, and so the woman didn't know how else to survive. Didn't matter. They were all sinners. And here Jesus is. He is hosting these people. He's eating with them. He's laughing with them, joyful, sharing conversations long into the night. He's teaching them. And of course, all these people with Jesus are the same ones who the Pharisees would refuse an invitation from and would avoid. They were the outgroup of Jewish society. And so it was a big deal because meals were like this tiny picture. A meal meant a lot. It was like a microcosm of your place in society. To share a meal was a special sign of acceptance. It meant that you share common values, common ideas, common social position with whoever you're eating with. And there was this thing that the host and the guest would do. They'd go back and forth where they'd say something like, "It is such an honor simply to be in your presence. I am honored to be in your presence." And they go back and forth. And of course, here the Pharisees are grumbling. And Jesus is disrupting the way that they're interpreting the law, the way that they are naming who's in and who's out, who's clean and who's dirty. And so the Pharisees are very discriminating about who they eat with because it sends a much larger message, and Jesus is just eating with anyone. Now, Jesus wasn't about to back down from these meals, these get togethers with these people. And so he told the Pharisees a set of actually three stories. But today we're just looking at two. The third one's really good too, but it's just time. So we're going to look at two of them today. One of the stories comes from a man's perspective. One of the stories comes from a woman's perspective in Jesus' culture. So Jesus says to these grumpy Pharisees, he says, "Which of you, having 100 sheep, and you lose one of them, doesn't leave 99 in the open country and go after the sheep until he finds it?" Well, immediately that set the Pharisees back on their heels. Jesus just compared them to shepherds. But shepherds are in the group of people who are considered unclean, immoral, despised, sinners. See, the Pharisees have this weird love-hate relationship with shepherds because God compares himself to a shepherd in these really beautiful ways, like Ezekiel 34. It's just beautiful. And Moses and the kings of Israel, they are the shepherds of Israel. That's what they are called. They are shepherds. But the Pharisees, and they say everyone knows this, shepherds are thieves. Shepherds graze their flocks on other people's property. And shepherds have no honor to speak of because they're unable to protect the women in their homes because they're out with the sheep every night. So they have no honor. And not only is Jesus calling them the Pharisees, You guys are shepherds in his story, but Jesus is blaming them for losing sheep. He says, which of you having 100 sheep and you lose one of them? Now, Jesus could tell his story just saying, a sheep was lost. A sheep became lost. But he doesn't. He very explicitly says, you lost a sheep. Like, you guys were negligent here. There's an ancient Hebrew midrash, which is like uh, exegesis, a spin, a understanding on a text. There's this ancient Hebrew midrash that goes like this. It says, one day a sheep wandered away from Moses and his flock. And so Moses searched and he searched and he found the lost sheep drinking from a stream. And Moses says to this lost sheep, he says, oh, so sorry. I didn't know that you were thirsty. And as the Midrash goes, God responded to Moses and his mercy and entrusted Moses with the people of Israel. That comes from a piece that Kenneth Tanner wrote. Really helpful. So this rabbi that's commenting on this midrash says Moses realized that the sheep didn't run away from the flock out of malice or wickedness. It was merely thirsty. Only a shepherd who hastens not to judge the runaway sheep and who is sensitive to the cause of desertion can mercifully lift that sheep into his arms and bring it back home. Our world is full of people right now who they look at different versions of institutionalized religion, institutional church, and they look at it right now and they're like, you lost me. That's what they're saying in one way or another. They say, I was thirsty, but I could not keep up with your interpretation of the law. I could not shoulder the burden that you were placing on me. I was simply trying to survive. I was thirsty, and you lost me. They are repelled away. They do not feel like the tax collectors and the sinners felt about Jesus, which is, I just can't get enough. How often is that word? This parable's been around for a long time, but I'm not sure we remember to read it in its context correctly. How often is this word, lost sheep, code for like naming someone out there? Well, they screwed up. They went off course. They're bad. They're a sinner. Rather than, oh, I didn't realize you were thirsty. Which is a different understanding of sin, which is that understanding nearly so much sin, nearly all, is seeing that somewhere in there is the pursuit of something good. Now, maybe it got twisted and it didn't work out right, but there's a search for something good. Like this saying, G.K. Chesterton says, uh, every person that ends up at a brothel is actually searching for God. Uh, this there's some in every search is looking for a depth of relationship that's missing, looking for something that at its core is good. So Jesus, with this story, this lost sheep story, he's painting a picture that really plenty of people in his day understood. See, it wasn't like just one person owned 100 sheep all the time. Often the way it worked was a group of people, friends and neighbors and relatives. They'd all kind of pool together and they'd get their sheep into a flock, and they'd hire 3 or 4 different family members of the extended family to be the shepherds. And so those family members, they were the shepherds, they'd bring the sheep out to graze every day. And then in the evening, they'd bring them back into the courtyard of the homes, a safe place. Uh, and because this flock was owned by the group, if just one sheep was lost, it did affect everyone in the whole group. It was a loss to all of them. And so if a shepherd was negligent and if a sheep was lost, then going out to search for that lost sheep out in the rugged country, it really wasn't a laughing matter for the entire family, the entire clan, because it was dangerous. One person going out there alone, it could involve hours, it might involve days, climbing over rugged hills, trying to find that sheep. Little Bo Peep says, well, when your sheep are lost, just leave them alone and they'll come home. And she's wrong, according to the Palestinian shepherds, because the the Palestinian shepherds would say, nope, when a sheep gets lost, he's going to sit down and he's not going to stop. He's probably going to refuse to get up and he's going to do a whole bunch of calling, bleating, not bleeding, bleating. Bah! There was no such thing as calling the lost sheep to come to you, like, lost sheep, come as you are, come as you are, you'll be fine. And the sheep comes running. That wasn't the way it worked. The shepherd had to go meet the lost sheep wherever the lost sheep was. And it helped if the shepherd was sensitive to what the lost sheep might be seeking, because that could help the shepherd know how to meet that sheep wherever the sheep was. So 2 or 3 of the shepherds, they'd stay back with the rest of the flock, and the one shepherd would go out looking, and everyone's concerned. They're waiting. Is he going to arrive home safely? Will the lost sheep arrive home safely? So Jesus continues his story. He says, when the shepherd finds this lost sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and he goes home. And he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I found my lost sheep. Now, there's a whole lot involved in that. There's a whole lot involved in, first of all, meeting the lost sheep where the lost sheep is. Like, there's a lot of hiking right there. Uh, Hours, days, rugged country. But at the point that that shepherd finds the lost sheep, the work has only just begun, because the lost sheep is going to need carried home. That thing is probably going to refuse to move. I've gone as far as I'm going. uh, and so we're talking what? I mean, it wouldn't be unheard of for a sheep to be 75 to 90 pounds. Could be even lots more, slung up over the shepherd's shoulders. He's already hiked a long ways, and now he's got this hot, wet, dirty wool tangled with burrs and messy and heavy, and he has miles to go over rugged country to carry this sheep home. And so the shepherd could grumble and complain and blame, oh, this dirty, lousy, nasty, no good sheep. Like, if I carry this thing home on my shoulders, I'm just enabling it to run away again. It's the sheep's fault, anyways, that it left. Well, that's the kind of talk that the Pharisees were doing about the sinners. Those sinners over there. No, that until they clean up their act, we're not going to meet them where they are. We're not even going to eat with them. But the shepherd in the story, he couldn't be happier. He's beaming with joy, great guffaws of laughter. I found the sheep. It's an honor simply to be in your presence. And it doesn't cross his mind to grumble or to complain because the sheep is far too valuable to the shepherd and to his family. And of course, there's only one way to get this lost sheep home, and that's we have to share personal space. We just have to. I got to sling you over my shoulders. And sharing space is not a burden, it's a joy. And so, as the shepherd travels those miles and finally comes traipsing into the courtyard, the front yard of the homes, into the neighborhood, and he calls out, I'm home! And they see, I found the sheep. They all come running and they're celebrating. Not only is the shepherd home, but the lost sheep, he found that sheep. Can you believe it? And of course, he's famished, and this sheep is probably famished too. Come on, pour us something to drink. Let's whip up a meal. Let's get this sheep something to eat. Let's get this party started. Rejoicing. Now, this story, of course, it comes from the world of men in Jesus' day. And so Jesus tells another story to the Pharisees, a story that looks at this entire situation. Hmm, Jesus is eating with the sinners, tax collectors? Well, it looks at it from a woman's perspective, which this would have been infuriating to the Pharisees to be compared to women when they refuse to even speak to women. They, at least in public, to them, women are invisible. And here's Jesus, he's eating and laughing and teaching men and women alike. So for Jesus, he's like, yeah, why not look at it from a woman's perspective? So he says to the Pharisees, he says, what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one, doesn't light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I found my lost coin. Now, the lost coin in this story, it could represent the woman's next meal. It really could. However, oftentimes coins like these were worn on the end of a necklace of sorts, and it was the woman's dowry. It was called the ketubah, and it's a symbol of beauty and worth and security, because a lot of life wasn't done on a cash basis. And so coins were more rare than they are for us. Well, now we're in a credit card world, but uh, still, probably cash is more common to us. So she has these coins, on 10 silver coins on a necklace. And if she does happen to be kicked out by her husband, kicked to the curb, at least she will have her dowry, her ketubah. And their value is far greater than the money they represent. So it's not a great comparison, but for a modern day comparison, it might help to think about, how does a woman feel when she loses the diamond in her engagement ring, or when she loses a special stone in a necklace or a piece of jewelry? Once again, Jesus makes sure that he doesn't say, well, the coin just happened to turn up missing. He doesn't say that. He says, the woman lost it. He's making sure in his story that the Pharisees understand that they are the ones who lost all these people who they're calling sinners. They're saying, Jesus, you're eating with all the sinners. And in Jesus' story, he's like, yep, you lost them. So the, the difference, of course, between this story between the shepherd, lost sheep, and the woman with the lost coin, one of the differences is that the shepherd doesn't really admit, yep, I lost it. The woman does. Uh, she, she, she admits to her friends, yeah, I lost that coin. Now her friends probably know that she lost something precious to her and that a search is underway. There's conversations that probably happened, like, did did I happen to drop that coin at your house? No. Oh, well, oh, look, no, I haven't seen it. Uh, oh, man, I am so sorry. I hope you find it. And so they've probably had this conversation going on and living with a like probably a hard packed dirt floor, very little sunlight in the house. It's going to require a careful search throughout the house. It's going to require some better light. So she lights the lamp. Did she accidentally trample this coin into the dirt? She's going to need to go through every square inch of the floor. And did it just get packed down somewhere? And so she starts this tedious process. Like, I know it's here. I just have to keep the coin where it is. I got to find it. And so she starts. And when she finally discovers this coin, she comes out of the house and she's calling across the street to the neighbors, I found it, I found it. And she's just beside herself with relief and joy. And they know she's been looking, and so they all come running over because they're relieved and they're rejoicing. And of course it's time to celebrate. Hugs, laughter. Like, yeah, have you got any brownies? And so Jesus wraps up these these two stories in the same way. Both stories get wrapped up in the same way. Jesus says, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner, quotes, who repents, which is you rethink, you have a change of mind, you have a change of heart. There will be more rejoicing over one sinner who repents than over 99, quote, righteous persons who do not, quote, need to repent. In the same way, there's more rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, of course, what Jesus says to the Pharisees about not needing to repent, that is said like with a wink. That's tongue in cheek. That's full of irony because the Pharisees only think that they're the righteous ones, and they're just only fooling themselves if they really believe this. But heaven certainly won't be celebrating what they're doing. They know they're supposed to know the law really well, so they should know, like the law and the prophets. They should know what Isaiah wrote, where he says, "All of us, all we like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way." Like, i.e., that's Isaiah 53:6. It's i.e., guys, yeah, you can't categorize yourselves as we're the righteous ones who don't need to repent. That it doesn't work that way. Every sinner, every foreigner, every tax collector, every sick person, every prostitute, every adulterer, every person on the margins, every person just trying to survive who wanted to be with Jesus. They wanted that because they saw the way that Jesus' eyes lit up when he saw them. They saw, he feels like it's an honor to be with me. He meets me where I am. I'm not a burden to Jesus. Rather, he's celebrating me. And when you get that feeling from someone, I don't even know how to articulate how valuable that is. I have a few people in my life who make me feel that way. And wow, what an incredible gift. And so the response of repenting, like, I'm going to rethink in the stories that Jesus tells, repenting, Kenneth Bailey does a great job pointing this out. Like, repenting is accepting being found in the stories. It's simply, it's not, oh, I did all these bad things. It's accepting being found. And this journey home is a party. It's a celebration. So I look at these stories Jesus is telling, and then I look at our world and I just mourn how many people say to the Pharisees in our world today, they say, you lost me. And it isn't that every lost sheep out there has evil intent. or is wicked in some way. It's just that they're thirsty and no one recognized it. So they went searching and no one met them where they were. Now, our conversation wouldn't be complete if we didn't bring just a little bit of neurology into this. So what now I'm bringing to you pieces from neuro neurosurgeons, biologists, sociologists, social psychologists, experimental psychologists, some theologians. We've got a smorgasbord of people who have all worked on this. So basically, when you put someone in an MRI machine, functional MRI, and then you start showing them pictures of people, you can show them a picture of a person for a 20th of a second, which is so fast. And you barely get a flash of an image. And the part of the brain that is wired for fear and anxiety and aggression, it processes that picture, that face, and it categorizes that person either as an us or a them. Uh, are are you the same as me, or are you not? Are you someone that I should kind of do this with? And so that happens almost immediately. Now, in the sequencing of how fast your brain does things, that happens really fast. And then a long time later, well, we'll just say it this way. We'll say long before your processing center has turned on and long before you know anything about this person, you are already feeling emotions about this person. Do you catch that? So you're you're feeling emotions. Oh, I'm warm with you, or nope, you're not with me. You're a them. You're a they. You don't know anything about them. Your processing center hasn't even turned on. And so your reasoning in your brain is trying to catch up, which often means that we end up trying to supply reasons to justify how we feel about people. It's because the way our brain does this. So when you encounter someone who looks or behaves in ways that you view as not normative, somehow different and weird and wacky to you, it activates this part of the brain called the insula, which is it activates these feelings of disgust and contamination. And it's the same thing that happens whenever you encounter anything like where you think it shouldn't be. So, for instance, the hair on my head, hat head, uh, it I hope it doesn't disgust you too much. But that same hair, it's where it's supposed to be. But let's say I take it out and I put it in a sandwich, and then you see me do it, and I'm like, "Here you go. You want a sandwich?" You're like, "No, I don't want your hair in my sandwich." Well, even if I remove it, no, I'll take it out. Uh, you're still like, "No, no," because I activated this sense of disgust. I don't want his hair in my sandwich. Uh, and some people are going to feel that regardless of even if it's removed. That object is now contaminated. I want to stay away from it. The same with saliva. We all swallow loads of saliva every day, which is kind of gross, but it happens. Uh, so you swallow saliva every day, but if I spit in your drinking cup and I'm like, here, I just spit in your drink. Here, swallow some saliva. That's not where it's supposed to be, and it activates this sense of disgust. Ugh, that's contaminated. You're not drinking that. So, and there's loads. I'm not making this stuff up. I'll cite this at the end. There's tons of people who've done important work on this. Paul Rozin has done a lot on that last one. So when we feel disgust about a person, uh, we automatically look at that person and we see them as almost like they're a different species. They're from a different planet. They are less human to us in some way. And so we're going to avoid them. Are you seeing how this is connecting with what the Pharisees? We don't want to eat with those folks. So we step off the curb. We go a different direction. We leave the conversation. I, I don't want to be around those people, whoever they are. Now, what triggers my sense of disgust and my sense of contamination and your sense of disgust and contamination, those could be very different. Uh, so it could be gross habits someone has, their skin color, their sexual orientation. Are they living in a tent? Do they seem super poor or homeless? Are they obviously an addict? Do I think they're a criminal or I know they're a criminal? Are they a foreigner? Are what's their gender? Do they have mental health challenges? What's their body shape? What's their age? How do they dress? How do they talk? And we could go on and on and on and on. The variety of things that trigger our insula in our brain, our sense of disgust, are endless. But that feeling of disgust invites us to name that person as somehow less than human. It's, oh, they're a sinner. They are scum. They're a bum. They are worthless. We've got, I mean, our world, I don't want to give examples, but our world has so many dehumanizing names that it calls people because we feel a feeling of disgust. And so we keep a perimeter. We make a distinction. And by naming them, we we feel a little better about keeping that distance. And we treat those people as problems, but we might even go so far as to say, I have a solution to the problem. And we might think we do, but we don't have a relationship. And when you want to say, well, I know the solution to this, but you don't have a relationship, you probably don't have a solution. So at this point, whoever we're talking about, you don't even know them. You haven't talked late into the night. Your feelings are ruling your response to them. That initial feeling of, whew, stay away. So if you avoid them at this point, you are acting like a Pharisee. And we've all done this. We should just admit it. We've all done this with someone because our wiring leads us to do it. But Jesus meets people where they are, and Jesus gets to know them. And it's an honor to Jesus to be in their presence, which is why they are just soaking it up. They they can't get enough of it. And so they're talking all through the afternoon, late into the evening, because these people are not disgusting to Jesus. And I don't think it's because Jesus didn't have an insula. And I don't think it's because even Jesus' insula wasn't firing. I think that Jesus, he's fully God, fully human. He's experiencing what we're experiencing, and yet he's also experiencing what love can do, how love can overcome what your insula would just do on its own. Now, the the world is full of all kinds of people, so we all have folks who will trigger our insula, our brain, our sense of disgust. Like you, somewhere in your life, there are people. It might be my arms are dirty from gardening. Might be my dirty arms. There will be someone in your life who you're like, ugh, they're gross in some way. Their behavior, their appearance, something. So how do we keep that from ruling our life, ruling our reaction to these people? Well, if you ask the neurologists, they say you have to get to know them. You have to build a relationship with them. The people who disgust you, build a relationship, get to know them. There's no other way around it. Interestingly, that is exactly what Jesus was doing. That's why he's eating with all these people and not just getting to know them in a like, oh, I'm kind of holding back, but I'm seeing if you're a different person than I thought. These people just feel they feel that Jesus is honored to be with them. They cannot get enough of him. And so you'll find over and over there are people who they don't fit the stereotype anyways. You you saw them as one thing and you thought, ugh, and you get to know them and then you're like, my categories are kind of breaking up here because they aren't what I thought anyways. So how do we do this whole, okay, I don't want disgust to rule me, and I I want to start leaning into getting to know people who they might initially trigger disgust. How do I do this? Deborah Hirsch has a really helpful insight. She says, before that person is a sinner, before they are, whatever it is that you're like, ugh, before that, they are someone made in the image of God. And so they're someone who's looking, who's thirsty, who's searching. And if that is what you pay attention to, then that is what you'll see. And that's what you'll call out. You'll invite them into. What if we lived into that? We follow the Good Shepherd. And the Good Shepherd meets people where they are. He rejoices. What if that categorized the way we respond to these folks? And he carries them home. The Good Shepherd carries them home. And only the shepherd who hastens not to judge the runaway sheep. This is that rabbi we were looking at earlier. Only that shepherd who is sensitive to the causes of desertion. Why did this sheep leave? Can mercifully lift that sheep onto his arms, bring it back home. Love you, friends.